Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we are finally going to be talking about the newest album from Evidence called Whether or Not. Oh, I've been looking forward to this. It's been entirely too long. See, it's funny. Evidence is one of the first rappers I really got into when I first started digging into underground hip-hop. First with his work as a producer and then as an MC, be it solo or with frequent collaborator Alchemist as Step Brothers, or most famously with DJ Babu and Raka Ira Science in Dilated Peoples. A group that if you're not into the underground, you might remember very briefly for a minor hit they had with Kanye West in 2004. But really, at this point, does anyone in the know really remember Evidence more for This Way and not The Platform or Expansion Team or solo with the Weatherman LP and especially Cats and Dogs? Sure, his delivery is more low-key than most, but I put him in the same category as collaborator and fellow LA native LMNO, where the subtler elements of his delivery pull the audience closer, and he's a smart and effective MC and producer in order to back it up. I reviewed two affiliated projects of his in 2014 with Dilated Peoples and Step Brothers, both of which I really like to this day, but it has been a while since he's run solo. He collaborated with Cookbook in 2016 and produced nearly an entire record for Canadian rapper Madchild a year later, but after over an hour and a half of Migos, this was the sort of hip-hop I really wanted to revisit. Now granted, Evidence records are not short either, this is just under an hour, but the content, it was bound to cut a lot deeper. This is sort of hip-hop I can really sink into, and I had every reason to expect this was going to be great. He had beats of his own, plus some from Alchemist and one from DJ Premier, plus guest appearances from everyone from Slug of Atmosphere to Rapsody and Styles P, plus old friends like Crondon and Raka Ira Science. And considering he was framing this as the capstone to his weather themes explored over his past two solo albums, I had high hopes for this. Were they justified? Did Whether or Not stick the landing for me? Well, here's the thing. Having gone through this record at length a number of times, and it was a joy to do so, I'm not gonna say it hits with quite the same immediate impact of Cats and Dogs, or even Directors of Photography, both of which felt a little bit more thematically dense to really push Evidence's best material conceptually over the top. But I also can't deny I enjoyed the hell out of Whether or Not, because in terms of bars, hooks, production, and individual standouts, this might be Evidence's most refined and consistent project to date, especially solo. Not his most grandiose or showy or colorful, but considering that he's never really been in his lane for that to begin with, it feels more like a purification of his style and sound, and it really leads to some really terrific results if you're willing to give it the time. But at the same time though, if you're familiar with Evidence as an MC, you'll know what to expect going in. The rhymes, they're tight as hell, with a steady and very measured delivery that you can almost tell how he takes pride in picking precisely the right word and then saying it very well. And some of the topics, they are a little well-worn. Deliberations on his creative process, the stark contrast between his sunny home in LA and the murky patter of weather that characterized a lot of his thought process. We'll come back to that. The occasional reference to hustling and pot, but nearly always sidelined by a desire to flex more through his wordplay, and, of course, references to global travel that's always distinguished Evidence's taste beyond just touring, and it's really something unique about his flexing that I actually really like. But of course, the devil here is in the details, and let's start off with the production, which on the surface might seem to have much of the same weathered texture you would expect in traditional boom bap in the underground, with the thicker drums, all the scratching, and the backing samples, but the tones that Evidence and his producers are using this time around are a fair bit different, with more prominent and developed pianos, guitars, flutes, and synth lines around that rougher beat. Now take what's easily the best track on this album, Powder Cocaine, featuring one of Slug's best verses in a while, probably years. What's more pronounced in the melody though is a shifting vocal sample, only with spikes of guitar echoing off of it. Or take how Primo flips a sample of Nuttin' by a G-Thing by Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg that adds a lot of G-Funk touch to 10,000 Hours, a vibe that Evidence would later push even further on the next song, What I Need, with a great soul sample and synth accents that draw a little bit on that G-Funk vibe too. Hell, if there was one hidden advantage that Evidence accentuates with this album, it's that usage of greater melody to to emphasize his hooks that are often more built on scratches than anything else. The wheedling keys behind The Factory, the warped string samples behind Throw It All Away in the title track, the more atonal spikes on Bad Publicity that actually managed to stick the landing for me thanks to the guitar, and a great imposing hook from Crondon, the gentle flutes, and the gorgeous cascading piano line on Love Is a Funny Thing, or that meaty organ line on Wonderful World that I always like coming from Evidence. Hell, I was expecting the adolescent vocal samples on the closing track By My Side 2 might get a little shrill for me, but you know what? Given the content of the song, they actually fit in quite well. It's a fantastic closer. And yet through it all, there's that measured balance that's borderline meditative, especially on the watery pickups and spacious flutes on Raindrops that can't help but feel tremendously relaxing. It's kind of a funny thing about Whether or Not, how seamless the production can feel with the flows and grooves, never quite dominating or sticking out or becoming imposing, but you can tune in at any time if it faces the background to pick up something that's so clever or impeccably refined. Which, you know what, I'd probably say also applies to the guest verses. I wouldn't say they're all great. The trading verses with Defari on Runners, it was fine, but not really a standout. And I can't say I was as wowed as I wanted to be from Styles P on Love Is a Funny Thing, especially opposite Rapsody, who just delivered. But this record has that uncanny ability to fit them all in on roughly the same playing field, with nobody outshining the others. Content and curation, it was definitely on point there, and I respect that. So you know what, let's dig into that content, and I'd argue there's both more and less than you might think with Whether or Not. As I mentioned earlier, there isn't quite that same strong thematic core beyond that careful, measured deliberation that characterizes the album, but there are some consistent metaphors, especially with the rain, for which Evidence is most emblematic of his creative process, reaffirming the life around him, so spare in his city full of veneers and fakery, but also kinda drab and wearing on the spirit in its own way. And as the interlude Moving Too Fast highlights, too much rain can saturate the ground and wash away life around him and worldly concerns that, yes, do matter. But Evidence is very much aware of that and how his contemplation of the game and his rap technique can leave him slipping between the cracks of it in his own lane without much competition, and quiet for so long he runs the risk of being forgotten by the changing world. And yet that's very much who he is. He's not making this music for anybody but himself. He appreciates his fans, but he's not making this for them. And the questions he raises about that changing world show the sort of wise moderation I can definitely respect. And not just because he knows exactly what he could have done if he wanted to chase trends. He was good enough to be successful. 10,000 Hours highlights the gap between older MCs chasing the past and new MCs that are just hopping on Drake's bandwagon, neither really innovating or crafting their own lane in the same way. And What I Need doesn't discount the emotional potency of new lanes in hip-hop, but Evidence is cautious to it, especially if technical skill is going to be sacrificed. What concerns him more of how the world is shifting around him, mostly through gentrification and in his hood, but also because he knows on To Make a Long Story Longer, quote George Carlin, "The planet's not going away. We are!" And considering how misty and slippery time can feel on this album with no clear knowledge of endpoints, something that he acknowledges himself in the 1-2 punch of Raindrops and Sell Me This Pen, that the real weight comes in noting that passage of time. But what feels all the more striking is the closer, where all the contemplation falls away to confront something that's very real. His girlfriend going through chemo for breast cancer, which was only discovered in breastfeeding his infant son. A moment of immediacy that, when placed in contrast with the rest of the record, it hits hard. Gratitude is always emotion that has aligned so much of Evidence's work, but here, with new life saving another life that matters, that someone's so close to him, it's a stunning way to really end this album and call to mind what matters beyond the hip-hop. So yeah, without a question, I can recommend Whether or Not. It will not grab you as immediately as Cats and Dogs, fair warning on that, but if Evidence is intending this as a conclusion to his Weatherman series of records, this is a terrific note to end it. Measured, clevered, and heartfelt hip-hop that knows its past, but still feels very modern and relevant all the same, coupled with some of his best ever hooks and some really phenomenal production. For me, easily a strong 8 out of 10, and the sort of hip-hop I'm always glad to pick up and find. And for everybody else, yeah, tune in. You need to check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know Evidence might be a tough pill for some of you to swallow. His flow can be a little dry and monotone, but he's gotten less monotone over the years. He's actually quite expressive on this project, and this sort of thing with the production and so many clever lines, this is so worth your time. Go buy the record, the link's in the description below, and for diehard fans, got the poll up there. I'm curious where you fall on it. I think it's great, and I can tell that some of you might think it's a little below Cats and Dogs. I see it, but I ultimately think it's roughly on par the more I think about it. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. If you want to check out the schedule, a link to my Instagram is right over there where I'm posting it. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.